Sparta's stated aim in ending the 30 Years' peace was to liberate Greece by restoring autonomy to Greek states subject to Athens. The Spartan strategy was simple: march on Attica and engage the Athenians in a land battle.
And so they mobilized probably the biggest single army that the Peloponnesian League has ever fielded. It may have been 50 to 60,000 men. And in late spring of 431, they march northward through the isthmus up to the Megarian plain, and they go into the plain of Attica.
This was the infamous Spartan war machine that enemies so feared, and Pericles was determined to avoid a head-to-head battle. Instead, he came up with a two-pronged strategy: offense by sea, defense by land. At sea, the Athenian navy set sail with 100 warships called triremes. Their mission? To conduct covert raids on the Peloponnesus. On land, Pericles' plan was more controversial. In fact, it was a totally unconventional approach to war.
Pericles' strategy was this. It was to avoid, at all costs, the standard way of fighting a war. A battle between hoplites of one side against hoplites of the other.
Pericles decides to evacuate the 200,000 acres of Attica and send its population of farmers with their families, perhaps over 100,000 altogether, inside the walls of Athens, and to ride out these invasions on the premise that Athens can be supplied by sea.
We've got a secure port. We've got massive walls around our city. We can import all the food we want. We can keep control of our empire.
They could do that because they could collect money from their imperial empire. They could maintain a fleet. They could rule the seas. It was all perfect.
Spartan has no tradition of siegecraft, so they're not going to be able to breach the walls of Athens. But they have this tradition of Greek warfare that you march into an enemy's sacred land. It's an affront to their masculinity, it's an affront to their sovereignty, it's an affront to their national pride, and you hack away a few olive trees, you burn a few acres of grain, and the enraged farmers in their frenzy come out to meet you on a plain, and then you wipe them out, and the issue is settled.
But the Athenians refused to budge. Instead, they remained barricaded inside the city, further protected by separate walls, including the long walls that extended nearly 5 miles to the harbor at Piraeus.
The Spartans are pretty much bamboozled by this. This isn't good. And this basically leaves the Spartans with no response. The Spartan system was based on, when we move into your territory, you move out, and we chop you to ribbons.
Frustrated, the Spartans continued to pillage the fields of Attica, an area the size of Rhode Island. But Sparta was ill-equipped to resupply such a massive army. So, waiting for the Athenians to come out and fight was simply not an option. 1 month after their arrival, the despondent troops packed up and headed for home.
The first year, Pericles seems a genius, but he didn't count on the idea that a city that was designed to house perhaps 75 to 125,000 inhabitants was ill-equipped in the summer months to house 250 or 300,000 inhabitants. It doesn't have the sewage facilities, it doesn't have the water facilities, it doesn't have the housing.
Pericles' biggest miscalculation, however, had nothing to do with sanitation or overcrowding.
Where he went wrong was in underestimating the effect on morale of being, in effect, cowardly. Going behind your walls, seeing the Spartans come, and doing nothing. That went against the grain of the Greek code of hoplite morality.
When the Spartans marched on Attica the following summer, Pericles' strategy was clearly under fire. Yet no one could possibly have foreseen what would happen next.
Athens was hit by a terrible plague, which wiped out something like 1/3 of the population in Athens. Think about what that would mean. Translate that into American terms. I mean, you're talking about what, 90 million people?
The deadly disease, probably brought aboard a grain ship from Egypt, turned the streets of Athens into corridors of horror. The city was littered with dying men. Young and old, rich and poor fell victim. The plague played no favorites.
The effect of the plague was to cast Athens, and consequently its army and navy, into a state of disarray.
And suddenly, the Athenian game plan doesn't look great. It also kills Athens' leader, Pericles, and suddenly the man with the plan is no longer around to pursue it.
The death of Pericles left Athens prey to hostile factions and reckless leaders. But what also died was even more profound: his extraordinary vision.
And that caused extreme problems for the Athenians because there was no obvious succession to him. He hadn't planned one, and it was a democratic city. There was no government, and the individuals who each thought they ought to be the successor had rather different views, and they lacked the authority of Pericles. So Athens was in a difficult position.
In addition to the devastating losses, the plague also inflicted enormous psychological damage on the Athenians. Their faith in the gods was rattled, their self-confidence severely shaken.
And in the aftermath of this, they sue for peace. The Spartans think they're going to win, and they turn down the peace offer, and the war goes on.
The Athenians all of a sudden have become wimps, is the way it would have looked to the Spartans. They won't come out and fight us. They've never done that before. And therefore, it's terrible for us to make peace, I think the Spartans must have said, with people who don't even have the guts to come out and fight.
It broke their back for the moment, but the Athenians are kind of like the Americans. They're tremendously resilient people.
And so, Athens assembled 250 triremes, making it the largest naval deployment of the war. Following a revolt on the island of Lesbos, they made use of this force and blocked the harbors of Mytilene. The next year, 427 BC, Athenian general Nicias led Athens to victory at Minoa. The Spartans countered with a decisive win at Plataea. And so went the Peloponnesian War, from city to port to island, all over the Aegean. Strike and counterstrike, revolt and forced submission.
And so both Athens and Sparta, in the first few years of the war, are really in pretty desperate straits. Neither of them really has a way to win this thing.
Despite their resolve, the Athenians especially felt the chilling effects of war. Their population was devastated, their land ravaged, and their treasury nearly exhausted. Still, as the campaign season of 425 approached, Athens valiantly prepared for battle. That summer at Pylos, on the western shores of Greece, the Athenians forced the unprecedented surrender of 120 Spartan equals. Shattered forever was the carefully cultivated myth that neither force nor famine could make the Spartans give up their arms.
The Spartans were so upset at this loss of Spartan manpower, and also, by the way, nobody could believe that Spartans ever surrendered. It was inconceivable. It never happened before, so that they just wanted to wipe this whole thing out, but they also didn't want these men to be killed. It was these hostages that finally compelled the Spartans to make peace.
But on what terms? After 6 grueling years of fighting, no useful result could be claimed by either side. Sparta was unable to liberate Greece from the grip of the Athenian Empire, while Athens had failed in its quest for absolute security, the very reason Pericles risked war in the first place. The expenditure of lives, suffering, and money, it seemed, was all in vain. Eventually, an uneasy peace would be brokered,